It's always nice to be here, and thank you again for the opportunity. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Yeah, so Thorsten already introduced the title, Are We Gods or Gods? The second one with the apostrophe, meaning that we belong to God. And so, just a little bit of background on this piece of research that I've done. My research on the New Age movement was part of my master's thesis, and that is a couple of years ago, and I've never updated any of my findings or I've never revisited the New Age movement since then. So if I can encourage you, maybe there's more recent stuff that's already contributing to this movement or this topic at least. So if you do want to go and read up some of it, I'm sure there will be new articles and new material out there. I will give you some book recommendations at the end if you are interested in going and doing some reading as well. But I think when it comes to the New Age movement, it's always good to sort of start with a definition. But the problem is, and most scholars agree with this, is that it's kind of difficult to define the New Age movement. In fact, many have described the New Age movement as sort of a jelly-like substance, because the moment you think you've grasped it, it just takes on a different form, and then it slips through your fingers again, and so you have to start all over again, trying to define and make sense of this movement. Now, in my readings on the New Age movement, I have found three definitions which I usually give people, and which I think is helpful because each definition emphasizes something different about the New Age movement that's worth knowing. All right, and the first one and the shortest one is always from Walter Martin, and he just basically defined the New Age movement as the dethronement of God and the enthronement of man. Now, this is a short description of what it is, but one of the reasons I think it's important is because it captures in essence what the New Age movement is trying to do. It's in essence trying to dethrone God and enthrone mankind. This is not just one particular man or person that the New Age movement is trying to enthrone as God. It's trying to enthrone the entire mankind as gods. So that's sort of the main aspiration behind the New Age movement. Another definition, which is probably my favorite definition, is the one from Douglas Groothuis. Now, just a side note on Douglas Groothuis, if you do want to read up on the New Age movement, his books will provide you with very good information. It is probably outdated, but it's still a very good place to start. He's written 3 books on the New Age, Revealing the New Age, Unmasking the New Age, and the Jesus of the New Age. And I can recommend those books as well. But he defined the New Age movement as, he said, the New Age movement is not new. It is the most recent repeat of the second oldest religion, the spirituality of the serpent. Its impulse is foreign to none of us. The appeal is ancient indeed. Its rudiments were seductively sold to our first parents in the garden. Human pride was tickled and it jumped. Now, the reason I like this definition is because it tells us that although this thing is called the New Age movement, it's not really that new. All right, now we have a local scholar here in South Africa, Christina Steyn, and she did say in her book, The Transitions of Worldview, she did say that it's actually trite to say that there is nothing new in the New Age movement. Now, she's not wrong in saying this because everybody says this, that there's nothing new to it. But I think we must remember that, yeah, it is a kind of a cliche, therefore, to say that there's nothing new to this movement. But I think we have to remember that there's a great deal of justification behind this claim. If you go and study some of these characteristics, which we'll go through in a moment, you'll see that the roots of this movement can be traced back in both the East and the West to centuries before the life of Jesus Christ. In fact, someone argued that you can probably trace the New Age movement back to ancient Gnosticism, and we'll maybe talk about that as well in a moment. But so it's not new. It's not new. Many of the ideologies that's sort of foundational in this movement. It's nothing new. He calls it the recent repeat of the old Satan playing on our deepest longings for peace, connection, abundance, and immortality. All right, but although these ideas are old, as I've just alluded to, it's also just quickly worth looking at two figures who, to a large extent, can be considered to be the father and the mother of the modern face of the New Age. All right, more in a modern sense. And the first guy there is Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, and he is the founder of the New Thought movement, which many of you might have also heard about. The New Thought movement is not the same as the New Age movement, but the New Thought movement is considered to be a forerunner and a tributary movement to the New Age movement. So you can trace the steps back into the New Thought movement and then further back as well. So, but anyways, Phineas Parkhurst Quimby was the guy who started the New Thought movement. Let me just give you a date here. He lived between 1802 and 1866. And so he founded the New Thought. And one of his main theses was that the source of all sickness is in our minds. And he said, if that is the case, then the source of all healing must also be in our minds. And so if you think positively, if you and express positive words and so on, then you can be the cause of your own healing again. So that was one of his theses. And you know who else? Many of this name might also be familiar, but Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, which is neither Christian nor scientific, but she claimed that Phineas Parkhurst Quimby healed her with these techniques, and then she went and founded the Christian Science cult, which basically operates on the same principle. All right, so that's Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, and the second person is Helena Blavatsky. Now, she lived she was born in 1831 and she died in 1891. In any case, she founded the Theosophical Society, and it is said that she made regular contact with upper spiritual beings, and many of the things that she achieved in life, she would have said that, listen, I was just making sure that these upper spiritual beings, that their wills were being fulfilled on earth. And what's interesting about the Theosophical Society, I don't know who of you are familiar with the Nuwe Hervorming with Sakkie Spangenberg and Professor Wolmerans. When they started to teach their ideas, which is mainly regarding the historicity of Jesus Christ and his resurrection and these kind of events in his life, when they started to teach their ideas, one of the first communities in South Africa that sort of opened their doors to them was our own Theosophical Society in South Africa, who listened to them, and then afterwards they just told them that, listen, they appreciate their research, but what they're telling them is nothing new to them. Now you can go and research the Nuwe Hervorming. It's basically the South African version of the Jesus Seminar in the US. But in any case, that's just an interesting note on the Theosophical Society. So she founded the Theosophical Society. So these two figures, Parkhurst, Phineas Quimby, and Helena Blavatsky, are sort of the modern parents of the New Age movement. So that's the second definition was from Douglas Groothuis. Now the third and final definition, which I think is also helpful, is from Ron Rhodes. And he describes the New Age movement. He says, it is not a single monolithic organization. It is best understood as a loosely structured network of individuals and organizations who share a common vision of a new age of enlightenment and harmony, and who subscribe to a common set of religious and philosophical beliefs. Now, on the one hand, this definition highlights the complexity, the diversity, the vastness of the New Age movement, because there's no one. So if you look at the Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, you can say, well, there's this thing called the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. That's their organization. The New Age movement doesn't have one main organization. It also doesn't have one fixed creed which it subscribes to. So it's diverse. It's not just one church. It's churches. It's cults. It's organizations, and everybody has variety of interests, commitments, and different goals and causes, and so on and so forth. So that's the one thing that this definition emphasizes. But the other thing is also that although that is the case, there is unity in this movement. There is some sort of unity, and given that there is some unity, it also gives us the capacity to trace the characteristics of this movement in a set of propositions or traits that we can legitimately, let's just say, legitimately put under the banner of the New Age movement. And so I can go through some of these. Next, that's the next step I want to do, is I want to go through some of these characteristics. So although this movement is very diverse, there's still unity there. And so we can identify some of their characteristics, which would probably be, many New Age proponents would probably hold to these characteristics. Now, the first one is that there's a vision for a new age of spiritual awakening and mass enlightenment. Now, in the earlier years of the modern New Age movement, this was very popular, that there's going to be this massive spiritual awakening and this mass enlightenment in the world. Okay, but in recent years, though, that is not so popular within New Age circles anymore, but you'll probably still find it there. And it's based on a sort of a spiritual evolution, where mankind is destined to partake in this spiritual advancement, which will reach its climax in the dawning of the new age, right? Now, James Sire, he describes this the following way. He says, cosmic history's future, which will finally be foreseen as the arrival of the new man, the new woman, and the universal new idyllic age arrive on the scene. And then, so this climax of history will end in the deification of mankind as a whole. So that's the first characteristic, this idea that there's going to be this mass enlightenment and awakening, which will result in the deification of mankind. The second one is the New Age portrays a growing infiltration of Eastern and occultic mysticism. All right, now what's important to understand with this one is Christian culture to some extent disintegrated in the West. If you look at the history of ideas and worldviews and so on, you'll see that to a large extent it fell apart at some stage in the West. And the result was that secular humanism and naturalism arrived to take its place. But in the long run, naturalistic humanism was very unsatisfying. And so many people who were unsatisfied with that didn't want to go back to Christianity. They went to the East for their answers. So they went to sit at the feet of some of these Eastern gurus. And a good example of this is, if you want to see a very good example of how this is actually portrayed, is there's a documentary called Wild Wild Country. It's 8 episodes, if I remember correctly. And it's about a cult that started in the East, but because they deviated from Hinduism in India, India sort of banned them. And then they went to the West, they went back to the US again, and there they established the cult and so on. So you can really go and watch it. It portrays this movement to the East and back from the East to the West. It portrays it very accurately. But in any case, so these guys who went to the East sooner or later arrived back in the Western world, and what they did is they brought the East with them. They brought all these ideas, and so this resulted in a strong syncretism, a mixture between Eastern and Western worldviews and ideas. One scholar, he observes that ancient Eastern traditions have shaped the new spirituality even more dramatically than have ancient Middle Eastern ones. He adds, Buddhist influence is evident virtually everywhere on the contemporary cultural scene. And so in this sense, the New Age movement has become this giant cosmic sponge which absorbs different ideas from different religions, mixes them together, and turns it into a mystical spirituality. Now, many scholars is of the opinion that the New Age movement is now as mature as it will ever be because of this mixture of different ideas. And the reason is, if you mix a lot of different ideas, you're going to end up with, well, you're most probably going to end up with flat out contradictions within your own worldview. So that's why they don't think this worldview will mature any further. It's now as mature as it's ever going to be, with all its rough edges and inattentions. But here's the point to identify, though, is that if this is the case, this means that New Age proponents has the luxury of mixing and matching until they eventually end up with a spiritual product that is right for the individual person. And so the popular catchphrase to describe this is they are cherry picking. That is what this allows them to do. And so if you, for example, read a book like The Secret from Rhonda Byrne, you'll find on the one page she's quoting Jesus, on the next page she's quoting Einstein, on the next page she might even be quoting Parker's Phineas Quimby, and then on the next page she might be quoting Oprah. So you have all these this cherry picking of sources. So you'll find that. That's the second characteristic, this growing infiltration. The third one is the pantheistic, monistic worldview of the New Age. All right, now because of this Eastern influence, the worldview that sort of captures the New Age movement is called the pantheistic, monistic worldview. Now, pantheism is the belief that God is all in all. All right, so God is all in all. Now, in this sense, God pervades all things, contains all things, subsumes all things, and is found within all things. Nothing exists apart from God, and all things are in some way identified with God. In short, pantheism views the world as God and God as the world. Put more precisely, all is God and God is all. Nothing exists that is not God. All right, now that is pantheism. Now, in turn, monism, which is the second word that's part of this worldview, means all is one. And in this sense, nothing that exists is really distinct from anything else that exists, which is just to say, in the final analysis, only one thing exists. And that one thing, you can call it the universe, reality, the one, the divine mind, or whatever you like. This one reality cannot be divided or decomposed into more fundamental parts or constituents. So there you have it. This God is all in all and all is one. All right, so that's the third one. Now, let me quickly read to you a quote from Rhonda Byrne in her book, The Secret, where she expresses this worldview. For example, she writes, some of the greatest teachers and avatars describe the universe by saying that all that exists is the one universal mind, and there is nowhere that the one mind is not. It exists in everything. The one mind is all intelligence, all wisdom, and all perfection, and it is everything and everywhere at the same time. If everything is the one universal mind, and the whole of it exists everywhere, then it is all in you. And this leads us to the fourth characteristic. I think it's the fourth one already, but the deification of the self. If you grant this pantheistic monistic worldview, pretty soon you will collapse into the deification of each individual person. Because if God is all in all and all is one, then the divine is manifested in everything. You can think of it this way. You have a lake, a big lake, with different streams flowing from this lake. And just like the water in the different stream is of the same essence as the water that is in the lake, so each individual person is of the same essence as the divine. And so that is sort of an analogy that might help you to make sense of this. But as I said earlier, early movements in the early church already, like Gnosticism, certain streams of Gnosticism taught that the end goal of your spirituality is become divine, is to reach this sort of deification of yourself. So these older religions already and movements already placed a strong emphasis on the divine and your own deification. And many of them, like Gnosticism, which comes from the Greek word gnosis, is based on this gnosis meaning knowledge, but the name is then based on this idea that you can achieve if you have access to hidden or supposed secret knowledge in the universe, then you will reach that deification. So it's based on this, the role of hidden knowledge, the role of secret knowledge, and how you have to get to that knowledge. And that is what ultimately saves you and in effect transform you into a deity. So one's own divinity in this sense can be more fully realized by reaching alternate states of consciousness using various means in the New Age movement to attain this hidden knowledge, right? And what's interesting though is this is exactly why many of the practices which you will find in the New Age movement is based on you creating your own reality, you building and creating your own reality. Because if you are a god, then you need to be able to create in your own image, right? And so this is typically done by using your thoughts and words. And there you can trace it back. You can trace it back to Parker's Phineas Quimby as well. Another characteristic is the apparent support from modern science. Right now, New Age proponents, they typically have a high regard for science. But what's interesting, though, is that they use the support of science for their spiritual views, and then also use it to criticize the existing scientific consensus. Okay, so the New Age has many phrase it this way: the New Age has managed to hijack science in some sense, and the discipline of science that will typically be used, especially if you read the books of Deepak Chopra, is quantum physics. Now, I'm not a physicist, so I can't comment on that, but I have seen when Ravi Zacharias have actually done an interview with a quantum physicist, where he explained some of these claims of the New Age proponents to him, and he just said, listen, anybody who sort of tries to hijack quantum physics to legitimize a spiritual worldview called pantheistic monism is committing fraud. Okay, so that's how he explained it. And then the last characteristic of the New Age movement, which I'm going to mention here, is the New Age movement managed to infiltrate different levels of society, and that includes the church, unfortunately. The New Age typically has a massive social agenda, and so that's how they manage to propagate their ideas and practices on different levels of society. James Herrick describes it this way. He says, the New Age spirituality has now moved into the lecture halls and the classrooms, the movie theaters and the surgical theaters, the corporate offices and the Oval Office. So he also claims that it's also, you can also find traces of it in politics as well. And then, like I said, unfortunately, the church is not excluded from this list. There's many examples of this in South Africa, but one that I specifically focused on with my research was the Christian Revival Church, known as CRC. Now, I know it's a very big church, popular church, but you'll find sermons from Pastor Ad Boshoff titled The Law of Attraction. And then he gives the Bible verses and he sort of clothes it in Christian vocabulary. But a practice like the law of attraction is the idea that you can attract anything into your life just using your thoughts. And so that is basically the main thesis of the book, The Secret. And so you find this being preached from pulpits in churches. And so you see the infiltration in the church as well. All right, so that we've covered, I think, 5 or 6 characteristics of the New Age now. But I want to use the rest of the time just to unpack some of the problems that you can identify in the New Age movement. But first, before we do that, I want to see what there is to redeem them. Because I think in any worldview, when we do a critical analysis, there must be room, if warranted, to redeem a couple of things. And I want to redeem 3 things in the New Age movement. Now, the first one is that the New Age movement does give priority to the spiritual dimension of reality. And so, as a Christian, I can say thank you to them for that, and also sort of say that, well, yes, I don't like secularism, this hard naturalistic stance towards reality, where any claim towards the supernatural or transcendence is just dismissed as a mere superstition or a psychological coping mechanism. So in that sense, I mean, they have a high priority to the spiritual dimension of reality. The second thing is that the New Age movement has reminded us of many of the problems and abuses in the church. If you go onto YouTube and you look at some of the testimonies from people who came out of the New Age back to Christianity, many of them will claim that the thing that drove them to the New Age in the first place was the abuses in the church, the things, the bad things that they experienced in the church. So unfortunately, the church is not perfect. And of course, from this, it doesn't follow that Christianity is false, but I think what does follow is that the church sometimes needs to apologize to people where the church hurts people and abuses people as well. So I think that warrants an apology. And then the third thing is that the New Age proponents will typically question Enlightenment rationalism. And I think that's a good thing, because in Christianity, although Christianity is based on nothing less than human reason, and of course based on far more than just naked human reason, we sort of realize the limits of reason, because there's things that reason, it's just beyond the scope of reason. And so to question the rationalism that is also sometimes prevalent in Christianity is a good thing, and to say that, listen, we need to realize that our reason has its limits, and that's not a weakness of any kind. So that's another thing that we can say thank you to the New Age for. But ultimately, I would say this worldview is not defensible. I've managed to find an article from Mitch Horowitz, who's a New Age proponent, and he writes the following: I call upon my friends in the New Age movement, of which I am a part, to take seriously the crisis of intellectual inquiry often found within the New Age. I cannot conclude that the critics are right. I simply cannot conclude that, because I've seen too many instances where the therapeutic and spiritual ideas and methods that emerge from New Age culture prove meaningful in the lives of a wide range of people. Now, so he desperately wants to defend New Age spirituality, or this New Age movement. But let me give a couple of reasons why I think it's not ultimately possible. The first one I labeled spiritualism versus realism. So here's the thing. What the New Age worldview replaces, well, they're replacing a one-sided naturalism, which you find in secular cultures, with a one-sided spiritualism, or at least a very low view of what is real. All right. Now, although we as Christians and the New Age are in agreement concerning anti-supernaturalism, we cannot lose reality altogether. And I think this is due to the major influence from the East, this monistic pantheistic worldview, which turned everything into an illusion. Okay, you don't have access to reality anymore. And then also the influence of occultic practices, which is mainly focusing on manipulating the spiritual. This sort of turned or separated the New Age spirituality from reality-anchored truths. And so in New Age thought, truth is not really a matter of correspondence to anything real anymore, but only internal coherence, which is determined by our own personal and subjective experiences. Okay, and in some cases, this even leads to the abandonment of your sensory faculties, which is ironic because they still have a high regard for science. But like I mentioned earlier, if you want to cherry pick your sources, then you might end up with flat out contradictions and so forth. So it's just a result of cherry picking sources. And this is how Sire explains this, James Sire. He says sorcery, he first says that the New Age will accept all the different languages of reality, that of sorcery and science, of witchcraft and philosophy, of drug experience and waking reality, of psychosis and normality. And the inevitable result of this is epistemological nihilism. You don't know what is true. You can't know what is true. You can't know what is real. You can only know your own mystical, subjective experiences. And so the New Age fails to see the importance of grounding your reasoning and especially your experiences in reality, in spite of the fact that whatever is not based on reality is unreality or unreal. All right, so you have this spiritualism versus realism. Now, what is that? Well, Jesus calls himself the way, the truth, and the life. Now, of all the things that he might be saying, so there's many other things that we might include in this claim of Jesus, but one thing that he is definitely claiming is that he is the authority and ultimate reference point for truth. And truth is that which is real, okay? Because he uttered perfect truth, he expressed perfect truth, he corresponded perfectly to the truth, he lived perfectly in the truth. And so he also adds later, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. So rather than seeking this alternate states of consciousness or practicing rituals to detach his mind from the real, Jesus found God's hand in the real world. For example, he said, he described that the lilies of the field reveals God's care. If you read Psalm 19, the heavens and the skies pour forth speech and knowledge. All right, the heavens, the real world, proclaim knowledge and speech about God. The Apostle Paul writes that he discovered certain invisible attributes of God in the visible real world. Listen to the language here. He discovered invisible attributes of God, supernatural attributes of God in what can be seen, the real world, which is the use of your sensory faculties. So the point is, we don't need to enter alternate states of consciousness and detach ourselves from the real world to arrive at spiritual truths. And we can also maybe say that just the fact that Jesus was raised in the same physical body indicates, and not a ghostly or spiritual kind of body, indicates that Jesus said yes to the physical world. He said, yes, we need the physical world. It's important. And so this is sort of what I mean with realism, that there's a real world out there, and we can find a God's hand in the real world as well. We shouldn't lose that. The second point of critique is what I labeled gnosis versus logos. Gnosis is the Greek word for knowledge. Logos is the Greek word for word. The New Age worldview leads to absurdities. Why? Well, in their attempts to sort of plumb the depths of the universe in search of ancient and hidden knowledge, or gnosis, they arrived at untenable conclusions. Here's just a couple of questions. If subjective experience is all there is, how can you know whether anything corresponds to the universe that other people also inhabits? If the divine reality is but an impersonal force, why is the only way to evaluate divine reality through a personal, subjective experience? Since certain experiences can mislead you, on what grounds do you make a distinction between deception and truth? If our true identity is that of a God, how can we avoid the conclusion that the divine can also make mistakes and undergo changes? These are just some of the basic questions that I think a New Age worldview won't be able to answer in a satisfying way, or consistently at least. Now, here again, we must realize that Christianity acknowledges the role of mysteries that goes beyond our reason. I mean, two of our major doctrines, which is sort of what Christianity is based on, and to a large extent what defines Christianity, is mysteries, right? We have the doctrine of the Trinity. It's not against human reason, but it's definitely beyond human reason. We have the hypostatic union of Jesus Christ, that he is two natures, divine and human, united in one person. That's a mystery. So we acknowledge mysteries, but we don't acknowledge absurdities. If you read John 1 verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So in the beginning was the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. Now from the word Logos, we get the word logic. And maybe I can just read you this quote. God is more than a rational being. So he's not just a rational being, he's a being with free will and so forth. But he's nonetheless a rational being. And so the principles of good reason flow from his very nature, right? He is the Logos. And so for Christians, learning the art of good reasoning, using your reason, implementing good arguments, and so on, is not just a mere intellectual exercise. Since it flows forth from God's very nature, it is a spiritual exercise as well. Sound logic is our best tool for arriving at truth, and to abandon it for absurdities like the New Age is absurd. We shouldn't do that. Another point of critique is moral preferences versus moral obligation. Now, although the New Age worldview has a strong social agenda, all right, to uplift communities and society with the aim to do good and so forth, it can't justify any moral categories. All right, why? In a pantheistic, monistic worldview, good and evil, right and wrong, are just divisions that restrain you, because everything is ultimately one. There aren't any diversity, there aren't any divisions. And as soon as you let go of divisions or diversity, you actually become enlightened. Right? That's the idea in this worldview. So you have to transcend these categories. And remember, since God is within you, we do not need artificial moral dogmas. We simply need to be our true selves. We just need to be who we really are, and since we are our own gods, we get to define that as well. So morality becomes only a personal preference based on one's personal experience. All right, now, the problem is that the history books are filled with, utopian visions that failed miserably in their striving for equality, the elimination of poverty, enhanced health, and so forth. Now, social upliftment is a very good thing, and it's worthy of pursuing that. But when you do that, I think it would be wise to base that pursuit on something that is much more stable than mere preferences and personal experiences. All right, and this is exactly the reason why, if you look at the history of Christianity, Christians have always participated in doing good in society, building schools, building hospitals, starting universities, establishing programs to help the poor. But one of the things that they did, or let me put it this way, the reason why they did this was because it was a moral obligation. Okay, it was based on the immutable nature of God, and God's nature is love. So the reason why Christians did this is because their Lord and God once said to them that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so when you want to have a big social agenda, base it on something that's stable, something that's unchanging, and that I don't know of a better foundation than the immutable nature of God. Base it on the nature of God. Another point of critique is occultic animism versus Christian theism. All right, now this is a major problem in the New Age because it sort of gets involved with occultic animism. All right, a former New Ager, Nicole Watt, describes it the following way. As the doorway to the demonic realm swung open, terrifying incidents occurred. And then she adds, although Christians often associate New Age philosophy with Christian balls, Ouija boards, and so forth, most New Agers regard these activities as dime store knockoffs of more mature paths of self-discovery. Okay, and this is how many of the former New Age proponents will describe their experiences. But here's the problem now. This is how James Sire explains this. A host of demigods. Remember, this is not applicable to the whole New Age movement necessarily. There will probably be limits in some circles, but some circles will be. This will definitely apply to some circles of the New Age spirituality. So Sire explains that in the New Age, there are a host of demigods, demons, and guardians who inhabit the separate reality or the inner spaces of the mind. Call them projections of the psyche or spirits or of another order of reality. Either way, they haunt the New Age and must be placated with rituals or controlled by incantations. The New Age has reopened a door closed since Christianity drove out the demons from the woods, desacralized the natural world, and generally took a dim view of excessive interest in the affairs of Satan's kingdom of fallen angels. Now they are back, knocking on the university dorm rooms, sneaking around psychology laboratories, and chilling the spines of Ouija players. So there's an involvement with the occult in certain New Age circles. And he makes this claim here that he said, Christianity closed this door long ago. Why? Why did Christianity close this door? Because remember, in a Christian worldview, we still maintain the existence of angels under the command of God and the existence of demons or fallen angels under the command of Satan. So we have that we maintain that in the spiritual realm as well. But here's the thing: we are not allowed to sort of try to contact them or to get them to aid us in some way. We're not allowed to do this, and the reason is because we're supposed to rely on God as the source of our strength, on our wisdom, our knowledge, and so on and so forth. We're not supposed to rely on these other beings because they are just not God. And so just a quick reflection on Mark 5 verse 1 to 20. Now this is where Jesus casts out the demons from the the Gerasene demoniac. And these demons were real beings. Okay, they were not a reflection or a projection of the man's psychosis. They used language to deceive and plan, and they entered a herd of pigs once they were cast out. But here's the point to see in this narrative, is that they were still inferior to Jesus. Jesus being God in the flesh, they were still inferior to him. And I think that is the hope we as Christians have. All right, let me end with this. The title, as Thorsten mentioned, is Are We Gods? Meaning plural, are we gods plural? Or are we gods in the sense of belonging to God? All right, now, the ancient lie from the serpent that we can be like God, it seems like it's not going to go away. And given our human nature, we shouldn't be surprised when we don't see that lie sort of just disappearing. Okay, it's still going to be with us for a long time. And G.K. Chesterton said that of all the horrible religions, the most horrible is the worship of the God within. It is a horrible religion because it's deeply seated within our sinful desires. It's also described as the waters of this religion are sweet and pleasant, and its cup is spiritually intoxicating for fallen human beings. Okay, so the New Age sort of underestimates the effect of sin on our lives and how we are just incapable of achieving our own salvation. While New Agers believe they can save themselves with their own inherent godhood, their achievement of hidden knowledge or gnosis, or just this upper spiritual awareness, Christianity has always maintained that we cannot save ourselves and that the source of our salvation is not within ourselves. It is outside of ourselves because we don't belong to ourselves. We are God's, apostrophe S. We belong to God. This is a good summary. The Christian message of the cross is this: the hope for genuine personal transformation, social revolution, and cosmic reconciliation comes not from us, but from God. Through the cross of Christ, the evil we all experience and long to overcome has already been defeated. Through the cross, human values can be enhanced and human redemption achieved. In Jesus Christ, the living water, the thirst for peace and hope that drives the new age will be quenched. Now, if you read a local scholar like Christina Stein, in her book, The Transitions of Worldviews, she expressed that the New Age worldview in South Africa will be with us for some time to come. And she explained how this worldview has already swept across Asia, infiltrated the West, and so on and so forth. It's still going to be in South Africa for a long time to come. And so I think it's good to be aware of this. It will take different shapes and forms and will manifest, if I can call it that, in different ways and in different places. But I think we should keep our eyes open for this, especially when it manifests in the church. Then we should try to get rid of it as soon as possible. But in any case, thanks, guys. That's what I had to share with you. And now, if you guys have any questions or comments, we can have this conversation.